What would you say you do here?
Well, look, I already told you. I deal with the goddamn customers so the engineers don't have to. I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people. Can't you understand that? What the hell is wrong with you people?
One of the things I tend to do here, or just we tend to do here on the channel, is when we do lay out criticism, it seems more often than not that we're laying it almost solely on the heads of the creators rather than maybe the people behind the creators that might actually really be the problem. When you look at X-Men, do I think Jonathan Hickman, is the real issue with the lack of quality on X-Men? Not really. Jonathan Hickman's a known commodity. He hasn't really wrote a stinker of a book. Some of his stuff may be a little bit of a too slow of a burn for some people, but for the most part, the concepts, the quality, and the execution are normally always there. But there is a new dynamic to the team. And it's not just the other creators. It is the group editor, Jordan White, who's been at Marvel for quite some time. Not exactly the picture of competency when it comes to comic book editing. And here with me to talk about that is my good friend, the X-Men historian, the Marvel aficionado. Doc, how you doing?
I am very good this morning, sir.
Well, I'm glad that you could make it. So there was an interview with Newsarama with Jordan White, and we're going to get to the details of that here in a bit. We do need to talk about Jordan and his performance kind of leading up to this. And before we get into that, I do want to say, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs down if you don't. By the way, we want to know your thoughts. Do we level too much criticism at the creators, and kind of forget the editorial staff that's really letting a lot of these people down? Now, Jordan White started out in the X-Men office. He got the call up with the relaunch of Star Wars. He was the group editor of Star Wars. Shocking that he got that job. But, the returns pretty quickly went downhill. Most people weren't satisfied with the line overall, although there were definitely some high spots in there. The Vader series was definitely excellent throughout. They always had top flight creators on there. I will say that Star Wars and Marvel probably happy with Dr. Aphra to introduce that character, although she was way better as a supporting character before she got her own solo title, in my opinion. But he didn't exactly manage that line very well. He also made some questionable hires just as far as his support team, most notably being Heather Ontos. Not a well-guarded secret that she wasn't the most competent editor at Marvel Comics, wasn't the most diligent worker. Somehow, underperforming on the Star Wars line got Jordan White a call up even to a bigger franchise, at least as far as Marvel is concerned. X-Men, they just got the rights to the X-Men back, to go with Marvel Studios. How the hell did this happen, Doc?
I don't know. I mean, unless he's just really, really good at playing office politics, his actual work, the work product that was generated under his, purview as an assistant editor in the X office, and then as the editor in the Star Wars office, definitely didn't justify it. I mean, it could be just as simple as there's nobody else to take the gig.
He's a loyal soldier and he works for peanuts.
Yeah. I mean, other than that, because around that time is around the time that they had actually worked out the agreement for Hickman to come on board, even though he wouldn't actually come on board for a full year after that. Maybe they kind of figured, we don't need the most competent editor. We're already going to have Jonathan Hickman to kind of, as the head of X, to steer that ship. I mean, that could have been their logic. Or it could be that he's just a loyal soldier and they felt that whether or not he'd actually produced anything good under him was irrelevant to the fact that he was going to follow orders and toe the company line.
He wasn't going to quit and look for a better job.
Yeah. And to be perfectly honest, unlike some of their other editors, he doesn't spend all of his time on the internet bitching about the people that actually buy the stuff. So I will give him that. I mean, he's a clown on Twitter, but he doesn't spend all of his time being a clown on Twitter. He does it very sporadically. And he does actually promote stuff.
I will also give him a compliment. So in this article that we're going to talk about 3 different quotes here in a few minutes. The interviewer is absolutely up his butt talking about how great the X-Men line is, creatively and financially. And I loved it when they mentioned the financial part. He was not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole because he's aware what the X-Men sales are. And that Ten of Swords didn't exactly bump the sales up the line, and that the numbers have continued to decrease at a quite rapid pace. X-Men sales are very depressed, got to be in compared to expectations. Like, he's aware of that, and he wasn't stupid enough to take the bait and be like, oh yeah, we're having a great year as far as sales. He's like, yeah, creatively. So I'll give him that. At least he's aware enough
to sidestep landmines.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a straight up landmine laid in front of him.
Complete boob. Now, we'll get into some of the stuff he was talking about where he made himself look a little bit more foolish before we get into job performance. Now, one of the big things he did, even though he knew Jonathan Hickman was coming on board, remember they relaunched the Uncanny X-Men. The Uncanny X-Men were coming back. This is important. Even though they knew they were going to reboot it like in a year. And they used that relaunch. It was so poorly done, and only Jordan White could even conceive of this, to where you brought in like 5 writers to write Uncanny X-Men for 10 weeks straight so they could relaunch into Age of X-Men event with a ton, and I do mean a ton, of terrible creative talents. And somehow he brought some of them with him. We'll definitely talk about that. Until we got the return of Wolverine and Cyclops as members of the Uncanny X-Men. Of course, they charged an arm and a leg on that. Didn't tell you that the old X-Men line was being rebooted until after you paid all that money. Age of X-Men was an enormous bomb. Like,
it creatively, sales-wise, it was atrocious. I mean, it's produced some of the most. Age of X-Men produced some of the most laughably memeable X-Men stuff that you've ever seen. The Leah Williams fascination with Psylocke and the Blob hooking up, it is still turns my stomach to this day. Does she just have a fat guy fetish?
Perhaps, I'm not sure, but you think these kind of things in bungling an entire event, bungling the relaunch of Uncanny X-Men, lying to the customers. Although I imagine Marvel and Marvel leadership kind of sign off on that. It's not like they didn't know.
Oh yeah,
but you would think that would maybe get you a step down. But somehow he's maintained his position at Marvel Comics. He's still the group editor of X-Men, despite declining sales. Now let's talk about, he does make himself in this interview with Newsarama look kind of stupid, because he does talk about Uncanny X-Men. They asked him about the Uncanny X-Men relaunch. And I will say this. Shockingly, we got 6 straight comic book issues from Matthew Rosenberg when he was a solo writer that were good. I'd never seen that before.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
There's another feather in his cap, I guess. So he's talking about the Uncanny history. The Uncanny title came and went through the years. Don't forget, it wasn't actually part of the original title. It was a later addition that only really got locked in when other X-Men series launched. Uncanny was just a neat adjective to tack on there for a while until we reached the era of multiple books with the X-Men name.
I mean, he's only like a third right here. Yes, Uncanny wasn't part of the original title. Everything else here was wrong. It got tacked on officially at issue 114, which was in 1978. The next spin-off of X-Men, which was New Mutants, didn't even occur until 1982. The X-Men adjectiveless book, there was no other X-Men book until, 1991? So no, Jordan, it didn't just get tacked on, and it wasn't just a neat adjective, and it only didn't get locked in when other X-Men series launched. That was 13, 14 years later, man. You're just wrong. Do you have any idea? Like, there's a reason why I look at you and call you incompetent with the X-Men. It's because you don't know your X-Men.
Certainly does not paint a pretty picture. This is blatant. I don't know. It's not misinformation. I think he just doesn't know.
Yeah, it's just blatant ignorance. He just does not know the history of the X-Men, and he is shooting his mouth off, thinking that to try to find an excuse for why there's not an Uncanny X-Men title. It's not just a neat adjective to tack on there. It was specifically chosen because they were unique. They were uncanny. There was nothing like them.
Well, he also has he doesn't think they need to be called Uncanny X-Men because I guess mutants just want to be considered human now? Is that what he was implying?
Yeah, he was implying that the X-Men, that calling them uncanny implies that the humans are normal. Well, why in the hell are they still calling themselves mutants then? Because that implies a mutation of something else, which makes them the other thing, the normal thing, and you the mutation. So why are they still calling themselves X or mutants if they're not calling themselves uncanny? It doesn't, your internal consistency here is just wildly poor, Jordan.
Now, we did also talk about kind of how they're supporting each other. And this is what he had to say. It's a very different experience as part of the X office right now that it has been It's a very different experience as part of the X office right now that it has been as part as any other ones I've run in. This is their
terrible. Yeah, terrible editing by even the article writer. This is what you get Games Radar for paying like $9 for articles.
All right, I'm going to try this. It's a very different experience as part of the X office right now than it has been as any of the ones I've run or been in the past or have heard about. We're really tight-knit. We work together and we support one another's ideas behind the scenes and with the books we put out. The fact that we're able to keep putting out such high-quality books and work together to do so warmly during such a time of tumult as last year is really amazing thing and one I'm extremely proud of. And he should be proud. Hey, the last year has been very difficult. To keep the team together is great. But like this, we support one another's ideas. But is he scrutinizing their ideas? Because it doesn't feel like this because we're getting these really stupid ideas. Most notably, the plant villains were getting all over everything. Even Jonathan Hickman needs someone to step in every once in a while. Like, hey, can we back off with the plant villains? So it sounds like they're just digitally hugging each other on Zoom all day long instead of scrutinizing each other's ideas and maybe getting a better story in the end rather than just slurping each other and telling each other how smart they are.
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. Comic book writers being able to put out comic books during a pandemic, I am not impressed by. Sorry. You have a very lonely and isolated work environment under normal circumstances. That the fact that you're stuck in your house and not able to hang out and go to the bar or go to an office, it's just Tuesday for you. So
well, there's other stuff going on. There are family members sick. There's a lot of people that were having, there was giving people panic attacks and stuff like that. So I do think it is an achievement if he was able to keep the team together, keep their spirits up, and keep the production flow.
All right, fine. I'll give you that. But you're right though. It does seem like just like a giant echo chamber, and your job is to pick them apart, find the flaws in what they're doing, so that if you can't come up with flaws, then you know that it's a good story, or at least it's a consistent story.
He also talks about putting out such high quality books. I don't see that.
No, I will not give him that. Look, I'm
Hellions
sorry,
is really good.
Half the line is terrible.
Is pretty okay, but it's uneven right now. I would say Wolverine has pretty much been really good since day one, and then X-Men's also pretty okay but uneven, and then the rest of it's trash. Well, maybe Sword, but we're not sure because it tied into an event so fast.
Yeah, I mean, so
although
Zebwell's
Fantastic Four versus X-Men was good.
Yes, but it was a mini series that they've already essentially made meaningless with Dan Slott. So you got Excalibur, which is tanking. It's been tanking for a while. Marauders literally rots on the shelf of every LCS. X Factor is terrible. New Mutants has gone from, okay, I'll check this out, to this is kind of weird, to, oh God, this is terrible. They have half the line that's pretty competent, and then half the line that's generally pretty awful. I mean, I guess you're creating books for everybody, for people that like bad comics and those that like good comics. You're just supporting each other's ideas doesn't make good stories, and it doesn't make for high quality books.
It does not. He also went into a little bit later, kind of like talking about the way the X-Men line works together, and I have some issues with this as well. The community that we have built making the books is amazing. That's huge, because my philosophy on editing has always been to try to help the creators do the best versions of the stories they want to do as possible. And the fact that we can have a whole line that works together to let them do all that, but still works together, is amazing, and a tribute to how talented and generous each of them is. It doesn't work together. That's the problem. That's why Ten of Swords was so bad, because the line is not cohesive. That's why it's schizophrenic.
Yes, exactly. This does not work together. I mean, maybe these are the best possible versions of the stories that they wanted to tell, but that just means that half to 3/4 of the stories being published are bad and shouldn't have been published in the first place. If that's the best version,
half the creators take the X-Men universe seriously, and the other half think it's an enormous joke.
Yeah, and you're not going to put together a line that works together when it's one thing when there's one next wave book. You can't have half your line as next wave, and then for reference, for those that don't know, it was a Warren Ellis book that was kind of a parody of superheroes in the X-Men or in the Marvel universe. It was funny. It's terrible in the long run for comics, but you can't have an entire line of books where half of them treat it like it's next wave and half of them treat it like it's Chris Claremont, Uncanny X-Men in 1987. You're gonna end up with a schizophrenic, as you said, meandering mess.
Then he talks about how talented the creators are. It's like, he was the group editor in Age of X-Men. Leah Williams was one of his creators there. He knew that she was a shit X-Men writer, yet brought her over anyway. Vita Ayala was one of the creators on that Age of X-Men line, brought her into the fold. He seems to have gotten lucky with Ben Percy. He was over at DC Comics at the time. He's taken over and done pretty well, but the people that he was familiar with, that he brought into the fold, have essentially across the board been failures.
They really have.
Because they're not talented. He should know that.
Yes, but his definition of talent and literally everyone else on the planets is apparently very, very different. But as an editor, his job is to evaluate and cultivate talent. So if he's really bad at identifying and cultivating talent, he probably shouldn't be an editor.
It's the damnedest thing at Marvel. I think incompetence is almost like
rewarded.
It's a key job skill. Could you completely ruin an entire line of comics with your bad ideas and then still feel good about yourself in the morning? You, sir, might be the man for Marvel.
I mean, maybe the fact that Jordan didn't throw everyone else in the company under the bus for the disaster that was Age of X-Man, maybe that's the reason why they let him stick around. But otherwise,
by all accounts, that was his idea.
Yes, but by all accounts, it was also his idea, just because he didn't realize that the Hickman thing wasn't happening for a full year, so he had to basically come up with about a year worth of filler crap in about 2 months. And the fact that he didn't throw everybody else under the bus because he came in right when that whole thing was like 2 months before. So
Age of X-Men was his first real thing as the X-Men group editor. And he botched it so completely that I'm shocked they kept him around.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't know. I probably would have expected to be fired after that, to be perfectly honest.
But this is the same company where Tom Revort and Dan Slaughter still pounded away even after that 616 documentary, where Disney themselves had documented proof that these two men were imbeciles. yet they're still they're still key components of the Marvel Comics universe.
Apparently, being an imbecile is, I've worked for people that like to hire idiots because they're useful. They're it's like hiring a robot. They won't give you anything creative, but they'll also just do what they're told.
Yeah, they'll go out there and keep spouting the company line, even though it's annoying the crap out of everybody, and they'll tell on everybody. You're like a little snitch.
Yeah, I mean, it's like having a little pocket gnome that just does whatever you want, and then comes and tells you any of the bad things that other people said about you.
There you go. We're not doing This Week in X-Men anymore, but we did have this interview come up with an opportunity to talk about Jordan White and what the sheer audacity of incompetence in comic books can do for you today. It can get you promoted.
Apparently so, and because nothing that he's produced thus far. I did want to mention the fact that this interview was conducted with Jordan White instead of Jonathan Hickman is kind of feels like an important thing here, considering that it kind of proves my point once again that Jordan White is actually the ultimate head of X and not Jonathan Hickman. Otherwise, he'd be the one doing this interview.
Food for thought, people. Food for thought. Thank you, Doc.
Anytime.